Nope, doesn't like us. Let's try again.
Oh no, I think we're good. I think we're on.
No, we are now. Yay! All right.
Yay!
Good
Yay.
afternoon / morning / middle of the day / lunchtime
/ anytime,
everybody.
wherever you are.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for joining us. This is Recruiting EQ, episode number 26. The pros and cons of virtual business brackets. Will work from home ever come back in style? And with me today is the lovely, the brilliant Julie Robinson. Thank you for joining me.
You're so kind.
I try. I think that this is certainly something that comes up a lot in our line of work of speaking to both owners of recruiting agencies or people who work even in corporate staffing, as we speak to them as well. And of course, candidates. You know, since COVID, before COVID, during COVID, after COVID. So there you have it. I think today's a good way to sort of address some of the questions, the concerns, the rumors, the whatever that we hear out there. So if you guys are joining and listening, or after, if you're seeing this after the fact pre-recorded, please feel free to comment, to share any of your questions, comments, stories, ideas, opinions, feedback. We will see that stuff on the right here, but we are not on LinkedIn. So if you're watching us on LinkedIn, great. If you're on Facebook, again, feel free to comment, but we're going to see your comments on the right. If they are long, they will get cut off. Apologies. We will address them. The comments we will address, but in the interest of privacy, because we don't want to get any of you guys in trouble for doing this during work, potentially, we will not name you in the recording. So there you have it. That is my little preamble. Julie, hi, and if you could please introduce yourself for those who maybe are new to us.
Good Lord, I didn't know I was supposed to be doing that. I'm Julie. So I show up once a week. No, I don't actually show up once a week at all, do I? I didn't show up last week.
Every 2 weeks.
But every couple of weeks, I show up to try and help with some conversation around some topics which we think is relevant for staffing and corporate recruiting. So I run Raymond George Consulting in North America. And so we talk to candidates and clients every day about topics like this, meaning work from home or not work from home, or how that's going, what the trend is, and the mood and the mode. So hopefully I have something of relevance to contribute to this conversation, which is probably a collection of a lot of views, rather than just my own. But it's perhaps I should have coined it a survey. I haven't done a survey, actually, I'm just joking, but just a collection of information in terms of sort of what the current view is on this particular topic. But that's me. That's what I do.
Well, there you go. And but that puts you in a very interesting and unique position, I think, to talk about this. You know, we are kind of like recruiters in general, or sort of a microcosm of what happens in the market, because if people want to go to a staffing agency, for example, for help and support, that tells you something, right? If a lot of people in life sciences need help staffing and are willing to pay a staffing agency to find them, you know, pharma engineers, well, that tells you something about what's happening in the market, right? And we are a layer removed from that. So we are talking to the people who are sort of like, we're this interesting macrocosm almost of being like, okay, well, we get to talk, okay, what's happening in life sciences, what's happening in engineering, what's happening in, you know, corporate finance, or like risk and compliance, or these very niche things. But it does seem like across the board, regardless of what field you're in, you know, with COVID, everybody was working remotely. That could, unless you're doing a job physically on site, right? Like, but white collar type jobs were pretty much entirely remote. And now they are almost entirely hybrid. There's like, as we saw in an earlier episode, right? According to Ernst & Young, end of January this year, it went down from 34% of the job market was remote in the US. Those are the numbers we have, sadly. Sorry, Canada. 34% in the US, down to 1% by end of January this year. That's a crazy shift. Again, we see these massive shifts these years. How do you feel about all of this, Julie, as you know, as far as how we do our jobs, but also as a business owner who is totally virtual?
Well, that's a big question.
It's okay, we have an hour.
That's like 5 questions in one there, I think.
We have at least an hour.
Yes, we've got at least an hour. I think that sort of the summary is, or the sort of the overarching view is, Well, a few things. I think that we were all pushed to obviously work from home during COVID. And as a recruiter during that time, it was like, oh, hallelujah, this is like a perfect situation. It's because
Yeah.
now we suddenly have got, obviously not the COVID thing I refer to, but we've got so much more availability from candidates because just logistics of getting somewhere, the time that it takes to get somewhere is now removed. So it was like a free for all, lovely, because suddenly the pool has gone from this big to this big, and now everyone can do anything, anywhere, anytime. So from a recruiter's perspective, it was brilliant and very, very helpful. Thank you very much. But then over a period of time, when the rules and regulations started to relax and people were less particular about that during the sort of the end of COVID, or the wrap up of COVID, I should say, it became, I refer to it actually as almost like the elastic band. The elastic band was really stretched, and then it started to sort of retract. And it's like, no, because then the role of a recruiter is becoming more difficult again.
Yeah.
So sort of sad. And I also felt in some ways that what COVID did was push people out of their comfort zones, push hiring managers out of their comfort zones, particularly around how can I have a remote first workforce, because that was the only option at that point, which is, had COVID not happened, would not have gone there, in my opinion, really. And it was more of the progressive organisations that would have even considered that, rather than perhaps organisations that were a bit more old schooly and wasn't really even on the radar, because they had strong views that people need to be in an office, etc., etc. So we were all pushed out of our comfort zone, which I actually think is great. And what I hoped was that we would stay out of our comfort zone, actually, to a degree, because it would become more comfortable and not out of our comfort zone anymore, and it would just become more of the norm. And I thought that, and I hoped that organisations could see that you can have people working entirely remotely, rather than bringing them back into the office. So I've just, long story short, it's, the wave has happened. People are going back in. Will it go back to 5 days in the office? I really hope that it doesn't. I really do. Not from my perspective, really. I mean, obviously, it's very handy to have sort of the flexibility around sort of partial remote, partial not. But it's just, I just feel like it's going back in time. And what did COVID teach us? A lot of things, I'm sure. But I think one of the things that it did teach us from a recruiting perspective and a workforce perspective was that people can work from home. A lot of times they're happier working from home. They spend less time on the road, or traveling, or in the car, or on the motorway, or on the freeway, or the highway, whichever country you're in. I think that the stress related to it is much less. In terms of just getting to work because of the traffic and the congestion, etc., etc. And the time that you can actually put into your day, I think, is greater, and it's more focused and concentrated. Yes, are there things that are lost? Yeah, maybe, but I think that they can be compensated for. So, very long-winded answer to your question, which I've now actually even forgotten what it was. But I don't know if that answers it. But my hope is that we don't go back to 5 days a week. I think that would be narrow-minded of the organisations that do choose that. Because I think there's a happy medium. There is really a happy medium. And if you are progressive, then I think you can have a couple of types of models, because I really do think that if you have a couple of models, meaning work from home for the people that are only able to work from home, and in office for the folks that are in office or can get to the office and actually want to be in office, then that's the optimum situation. It's like having a couple of work styles in the same organisation, where it's not mandated. It's like this sort of mandated rule thing feels very, I don't know, 1980s to me.
Yeah, and it does feel very like authoritarian versus just what's effective. It's about exerting a kind of like an authority over your employees, rather than doing what actually may work best and give you the best, most effective team and workforce.
Yes.
a million things about this, obviously, but let's talk about this comment that just came in from a mutual friend and colleague, which of course we won't name, but thank you for posting. Do you agree with the narrative that the contraction of the availability of work from home jobs is due to insecurity from the leadership ranks and a fallacy in needing to see staff in order to manage them effectively? In short, bad bosses.
Not
That's fair.
entirely. No,
Yeah.
no, not entirely. I think that what we, as in any organization, what's important is how do, and the structure and the, let's call it the experience level of your managers will then influence a lot of different things, not just the work from home situation, right? So, so I think that's an entirely different topic, actually, in terms of the effectiveness of, let's call it junior or less experienced managers, and therefore who is going to be successful with them or working with them or working for them. I think that what I would say to that comment there is that managing remotely is different, and managing face-to-face and managing remotely, I think, takes a different type of skill set, which I think that managers aren't necessarily trained in or equipped to work with very well, because and this is another topic, that I actually don't think that middle level managers, which is the sort of the lion's share of the managerial folks that are sort of frontline with their staff, if we're talking about numbers and just sort of like the, you know, like the mass of where the sort of leaders exist or managers exist, as you sort of go up into a large organization, they become less and less and less as you get to the top. But I think that the training and the capability of a manager within staffing to manage is not something which is paid a lot of attention to in a lot of organizations.
Yeah.
So are these folks, these poor managers that are trying to do their job, manage folks and do, you know, bill potentially, sort of like a billing manager? I think that's the most difficult job in the entire world in staffing. But it's, you know, has anyone actually taught them how to manage differently when they're managing remotely? And I bet you the answer's in most cases no. So is it
no, to your point, right? It was so new for it to be ubiquitous that I think a lot of people, even in their organizations, just maybe had never even done it before, right? Like
absolutely
it was brand new to lots of people, and how are they going to train people on stuff they don't even understand themselves, right? Like,
well, absolutely. Absolutely. So I bet you that most organizations haven't done that because they were forced into this is something that we need to do sort of straight away. So there was no time really. But after the fact, I mean, there's been a lot of time now. So organizations that have adopted that as a policy of work from home or partial work from home, how do managers, certainly mid-level or junior managers, manage the folks that are working from home differently? Because there are differences. And you know what, I mean, I've been in this industry as in recruitment for 35 years. Sorry.
Don't be.
But I haven't, but no one has ever trained me. Yes.
Just to explain why we're laughing. Yeah, the comment was, I'd argue that many staffing managers don't get any training, regardless of work site.
Well, I have to agree, actually, which I think is, you know, which is like I say, another entire topic. It's like a massive topic. I think that mid-level manager in staffing gets very little training unless it's a big organization, and the training that they do get in a big organization is sporadic. It's, I think, inconsistent, sporadic, and not necessarily current, and it's certainly not customized to a certain situation or, you know, set of differences. But going back to what I was going to say is, I mean, I personally haven't had training in terms of how to manage differently when you're managing remotely. But I did manage at one point in my career, I had a team of sort of 40 people that worked for me through various managers. I think I had like 5 or 6 managers. Or something like that these folks all sort of reported up through, and I managed them. And sometimes, if I didn't have a manager in place, I would manage the sort of the folks on the ground directly as well. And they were all managed remotely because they were in different geographical locations. So there was nothing to do. This is prior to COVID, nothing to do with COVID, but they were in different geographical locations. So I just couldn't get there all the time to see them, and so I managed them remotely. And what happens is that you have to play more or put more emphasis on numbers, because you don't see someone every day. You have to, but it's finding a way of sort of still having the human touch, and understanding what's happening in the office or with the group or with the team or with individuals is also very important in how to manage folks that are doing this job. So it's tricky, but I don't know that it always is considered in terms of like, and I also don't know how successful I was at it, frankly. But there's,
successful enough.
there's,
Yeah, exactly. So clearly, at least successful enough, if not very successful.
yeah, it was hard for both. I also think that it depends on the type of person that you are. So I personally like to, I'm a very direct communicator. I like to get to the facts quickly. I don't talk about a lot of fluff, which is perhaps where my downfall is from a managerial perspective. If that style matches the person that I'm trying to manage or trying to lead or talking to, then that's brilliant because we talk about the same thing. If I'm trying to manage someone who has a different style from me, or if I am internally also being managed by someone who has a different style, it makes it very confusing. So it's very difficult to get. I find it very difficult to get to the point. I walk away from meetings, especially when they're remote, not really knowing. I don't know what actually was spoken about in that meeting. What happened there really? So it's very difficult. And again, I think I'm off on a tangent, but I think that then there needs to be some sort of training or better training on how to manage remotely, if that's a work style choice that is not going away, for those junior and mid-level managers, particularly. And I think it's just, it's also just how to manage people and how to manage others. We've probably all been on them. How to manage a manager course at one point, but it's like what happens after that. So I think the inconsistency around training for others, regardless of where they are, is severely lacking in staffing.
Well, totally. And before we get to this next comment too, the thing is, Julie, is that you and I obviously talk about this stuff all the time, and some of the people who are on here talk about it. But I think it is worth continuing to talk about, because COVID, if nothing else, it is a good example, even after the fact, of something that challenged a lot of the sort of archetypal status quo things we just assume have to are the way things are.
Yes.
And it opened up an opportunity to talk about, hey, could we do things better? Is there a better way to do stuff? And usually the resistance is, no one wants to change. We're all so busy or whatever, but it was forced upon us. And now we have this little example, this almost like lab test of, well, okay, here's something that shook it up. And you brought it up before. What did we learn, right? And my fear is, I think that, and I usually go all hippy-dippy toward the end of this thing, but I'm going to do it early this time. My fear is that because it was co-branded with a pandemic and a negative kind of change, that I think some of this return back, or maybe return back to 5 days in office, might unconsciously be a little bit of the negative association that we have with going fully remote and wanting to harken back to a better time. You know what I mean? Like, that doesn't really exist, but like emotionally, it's just like, you know what? We want people in the office just because that's the good old fashioned way to do things. And most corporations that are interviewed on the subject, even in that same study from Ernst & Young, are saying they have no plan to do it. So I think hopefully you're right, and that people will not go back to 5 days in the office, and that they won't want to harken back just for the sake of it, that there is an opportunity to talk about this stuff still.
Yeah. And I hope so too. I think one of the things, so I've worked from home for the last, I think it's probably about 8 years now, actually. And I like working from home. It gives me opportunity to do lots of stuff, to be really focused, to work my day as I see fit. It fits into my lifestyle, which is great. And I get a lot done, I think, working from home. And I'm not a small talk type of person. I don't have a need to stand at the water cooler and have a chat with someone. That's just not my thing, which again is, that's just who I am. Don't have a need for that at all. Some people do. But even being the personality that I am, and I don't necessarily want to make this all about me, because that's not relevant at all. But What I do have, though, is a need for, and what I see myself experiencing while I am in sort of my own space, in my own bubble, is I do have a need to get out of the bubble and to interact with others,
Sure.
because that is also how you learn. So I think it's very, very easy when you work from home to just stay in this, in this pod of you, yourself, and I. That personal energy, and I think that that's. I was with one of our team actually last week, and just feeling the energy which is generated through being together. And this might only, excuse me, this might only be with one person, but it could be with multiple. But for me, it was that situation was one person. Getting that energy was almost like the drip feed of of something that infused like it took my energy to a greater level,
Yeah.
and which was highly beneficial, because I think in this type of job, I think energy is great. People can feel it, and if you're sort of flat turning up to an interview, not that I'm flat every day, but I'm sort of like this, right? But just having that infusion of energy from others, which was almost by osmosis rather than anything else, was fantastic.
Yeah.
And but that doesn't mean that it was in office, but it was with a colleague or with others. Even going downtown, or going somewhere where there's a vibrancy in the just walking up the streets if it's not raining, just walking up and down the streets, it's you pick up on that, which I think is really important for mental health and just sort of well-being, because it's like I say, it's very easy, I feel, to just get in this bubble of me, myself, and I without and sometimes the bubble needs to be popped, even though I am quite sort of insular and would like to sort of not be in a all-consuming office with a lot of people all of the time.
Yeah, you raise an interesting point, right? Just because you're working from home doesn't mean you need to be isolated necessarily, like in
No,
work.
yeah, you don't want isolation. Don't need
That's
to
not.
be cell block H, thanks.
Yeah, that's not sustainable. Okay, so this other comment that came in was managers are caught between higher work from home expectations from staff and in office expectations from the executive team. It has to be predicated on trust and clearly defined performance expectations. What is essential in building the trust for this to work? Yeah, I mean that's a whole hour probably.
Well,
Breaking out different
you know what?
theories on how to best manage the whole.
Yeah, what I think that I would say to this is that I don't know that I'm necessarily commenting directly on this here, but I think that as a manager, when you're managing people who are working remotely, you've got to let the microscopic, what time someone show up to work or clock in, or how many hours they put in, you've got to let that go. I mean, that will drive you insane, I think, if you are trying to manage to that type of reporting, let's say. I think you have to manage by the results, and which may take longer to come out in the wash, meaning it may, because you're not seeing the sort of like the daily actions that will contribute to the results, which you probably wouldn't talk about, but you see them often or hear them when you're in an office. So having the results, I think, speaks for themselves, but I think as a manager, you've got to let the minutiae go, else you'll just spend your life with the microscope, trying to figure out what someone is doing, whether they just put the washing on, whether they didn't, what time have they walked the dog or not, how long were they out with the dog, what actually are they doing? Who cares? If they're getting the results that you need, then that's good enough, surely, isn't it? And you know what? Good for them if they can manage to put the washing in, and walk the dog and do anything else that they need. Go and have a cup of tea. It's like good for them. I think the challenge then is to try and get a higher performer from somebody, perhaps, if that's possible. But I think it's around the manager's expectations. And I think also managing up. So to the comments point of view, so I don't think that there should be a difference in terms of someone working from home and working in an office. Why should they have different expectations?
That is
Why?
the thing, though, that I'm hearing about and that comes up in these studies is that people are like, okay, well, if you don't have to travel, then you can do more. So there's a lot of people not in staffing per se, but a lot of people are outside of staffing are work from home, and thus it's like that's the trade-off, is you don't have to commute and whatever else. So you have to get more done for your hours, particularly in environments, it seems, where, like you're saying, Julie, where they are beholden in their heads. The ethos is we're paying you for your time, and your time is, instead of your results, we're paying for you for your time and attention. A bit old-fashioned for sure, but
no, I think that that's completely wrong. So someone's travel time to work is travel time to work. It's not hours that they are employed. So I don't think you can have expectations of hire because you're incorporating someone's travel time. That's just wrong. You're paid for the hours that you work. If you choose to put more work hours in because you need to get something done, or you just choose to work longer for whatever reason, then that's up to you. But you can't enforce someone to work longer hours because they're not traveling, or because you're not traveling. That's not okay.
well, yeah, and I feel like there's, to me, this comment and everything you're saying too, I think these are some of the things that have become exposed from having this kind of discussion, which is an opener to a lot of different important discussions. It's not just home or work, but it's also like, what is in the mind of the employer? What is the point? Are they paying for your time? Are they paying for your results? What's the ideology behind what you're being paid for, what the expectations are? And as an employee, I think that people need to sort of start to look for these flags when you're looking for a next job, especially in a difficult market like this too, right? Are the metrics call time on, that you're there to the second? Or are the metrics by your good candidates, for example, number of candidates or number of meetings you have with clients or whatever else, and that the time is not as much of an issue? It tells you the ethos of the
Yes.
people who are paying you, and
Yes.
what they think is important, which
Yes.
I think also speaks to the sustainability of whatever. It speaks to the culture.
Yes.
If they just want you to be, if it's an authoritarian culture, some people find that relaxing. They're like, whatever, man, I clock in, clock out, whatever. It's good for just a 9 to 5 for some people. They just want to like not have the pressure, not have the autonomy. They may think they do, but then they'll sometimes go back to those environments because they're like, yeah, I just don't want to have to deal, I want to clock out and that's it. So it's not to say that one's per se better than the other, but those metrics.
But it needs to be a match. No, you're right. It needs to be a match. So whatever the style is, it needs to be a match for the candidate that's interviewing there, because it could go horribly wrong, or it could be terribly short in terms of how long someone actually is in, and what a waste of time. So it's very important to ask those types of questions, especially in staffing. It's like, what am I held accountable to? How will I be managed? What's someone's managerial style? But also for the manager, to ask those types of questions, like, how do you want to be managed, and what are the expectations that you would have of me? So I think it's a two-way street, which you don't often get that in the interview process. You get it on day 1 or week 1 or week 2 or week 3, which is too late.
Or never at all.
or never at all. You just get fired. Absolutely.
Everyone just gets fired.
Yeah.
Or is miserable forever. That's it.
Shouldn't laugh.
Yeah, no, totally about the metrics. Like I think that some people are just kind of like, I don't want it to be micromanaging, and it's like, what do you mean when you say that? What was your negative experience, and what aspects of KPIs that you have or the environment was not working for you as an individual? It's not the same for everybody, right? And people value different things. I had one candidate, which will remain nameless, of course, again, but when he said it was too much of micromanaging environments, a lot of people talk about, you got to be here from a certain time. No. It was the type of outreach to candidates. They were making him use templates when he had he was a top performer, young, but a top performer, junior, and he was getting great results. And they're like, no, everyone's got to use this template. And he goes, well, you're punishing your good performers. Astutely, he said this, punishing your good performers to try to pick up the slack on those who aren't really getting it. It's like, if I'm getting results, why can't I reach out to them in a more personal way?
Mm-hmm.
They're like, this is it. This is the brand. You don't like it, there's the door. That's, again, for him, it was individuality. He wanted the autonomy over being able to express himself, which, that one doesn't come up often, but funnily enough, probing a bit, it's like, wow, that sounds totally valid to me. As a reason.
I completely agree, but I think that also is either, you would hope that was only sort of one particular manager or leader, or, sort of next level up type of thing. And if it was, then if that didn't match the particular individual involved, then you would hope that, I think that's a manager that's a manager problem. That's a manager responsibility to flex with the candidate to get the best out of the candidate, because that is, that's like day one as a manager, is a very junior manager. It's like, do it my way because that's the way it works. And it's like, well, that's not always the way it works, right? I think you have to, as a manager, be very open-minded and adaptable to change. So great if your way works for you, lovely, that's great. But actually, if you're a bit more open-minded, maybe you would be better because you've adopted stuff from other people too. So I think that's about attitude.
For sure. And Julie, to answer that, actually, it opens up a little bit of a topic which we don't have to rabbit hole like crazy today because it's not really the focus, but we do have a bit of time. In this case, this is one of a couple of examples that I've heard of where I happen to know that the agencies in question that are grappling with these things are agencies who during COVID or just after involved and sold either fully or majoritarily to a private equity firm. And the private equity firm does not know any of the things we're talking about and does not care. They just want predictable results. So they're going for max efficiency and treating people like automatons, which in staffing, because we deal with people, it's not great. You're going to lose people. But that was it. A lot of people involved. Private equity firms bought in all over the place. We see it all over, not just in the States or Canada, in the UK, I'm sure too. Although I don't know that for a fact, but certainly in the US and a little bit in Canada. And they come in and say, okay, well, cool. Now that we have 51%, this is how we're going to run the ship. And this is so a lot of these restructures that we're seeing too. It's not individuals making decisions about a business that they love and hold dear to their hearts.
Yes, they have a goal and an agenda, and that's a different kettle of fish. So I understand that. It's just, I suppose, throughout the organisation, people might not know that and probably won't. So that is unfortunate because that will then leave a different taste in their mouth as to sort of what actually was going on there, which could mean that someone leaves or is has to move on from their current employment, which is sort of sad. So but no, you're right. It's you never know quite what is going on or what the goal is of whoever is really calling the shots, right? So it's you have to be careful with your voice on the topic.
Totally. And some of the better candidates that I've spoken to who have been a little bit more senior as like either billers or whatever have asked me when I've presented them a role somewhere, how's the company owned? Is it privately owned? Is there VC? Is there PE? Is there a board? Who's on the board? And I'm like, this is someone who knows, who's been burned almost all the time. They've been burned before because again, the involvement of these factors means it doesn't matter how nice your manager is, right? Like, so there's certain things way out of your control. So it's an intelligent line of questioning, especially for like a small or mid-sized business or a high up hire. Like,
yes, absolutely. I do think though that if someone can, regardless of what the motive is, if someone can demonstrate a great way of doing something which will yield better results, then why wouldn't everyone listen? So I think that that there's, I think that there is some pushback no matter what is going on. If you can show that you are going to or are doing a great job and will improve the bottom line, that's at the end of the day what everyone cares about.
Totally. Here's a question to throw at you that I don't even know if we've chatted about this really, but as a factor, do you think that it's a factor that certain organizations are using a brick and mortar physical presence to sell their service? That the fact that they have an office in X location with this many people who come into the office, blah, 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 is helping them win business potentially in their field. And that's the reason that they're going back in.
I think it depends what type of business you have or which business line of business that you're in, as to whether that would be a benefit or not. I mean, I mean, at the end of the day, you can spin anything in any way you wish for whatever outcome. So could I sell that as a benefit? Sure, if I chose to the right audience. But in my heart, I might think that it might not be, and it's actually I'm just stuck with my 10 grand rent per month, and therefore I've got to spin it in some way that it seems feasible or beneficial, because I'm stuck with it and I'm tied into a lease. But I don't know that. I mean, in the old days, we used to sell it, obviously, is because you used to get walk-ins. This is the old days. So you used to get people just walking up the street and they'd pop into an agency, the local agency, and that's how you'd get like a lot of your foot traffic, was how you got your candidates. But that's also that was in England, where it was more local and you had people walking around. Where in North America, or certainly in Canada, unless you're downtown, you don't walk around a lot. You drive everywhere. So it's a different type of model. But I don't know. I don't know that is a real big sales feature. I think, yes, you can add bells and whistles onto it if you need to. But yeah, I'm not a big proponent of having local offices or having people work 5 days a week at all in anything, unless, as you say, unless they have to be physically there to do something that's a manual handling type of situation. But no, I don't think it's necessary. And I think that by cutting you cut the talent pool down enormously. I don't know what the stats are, but I'm sure that there are stats somewhere around the number of people that moved out of the sort of central locations during COVID because they wanted a different type of lifestyle. Some of those might have been caught now and having to move back to somewhere which is more accessible to get into town or to the place of work because things have changed. But some have stuck to their guns. I mean, I spoke to someone yesterday who is still entirely remote, looking for work, and that's the number one thing for her. It's like I'm going to stick to it, and I'm entirely remote. I need to be entirely remote. Another one, I know that you spoke to a lady last week who works half of the year out of the country, and who cares? Great, good for you, fabulous, that's lovely. What a lifestyle choice that is. But it's I think that it would be very prohibitive to try and go back 5 days a week
for sure.
in some situations, which would just be a deal breaker for so many candidates. Yeah.
And on the physical presence thing, like you're saying, I mean, like it was eye-opening for me to visit people in the US and have them say, like, you came all the way from Canada, right? We haven't even seen people who are local since before COVID. And it's like, oh, okay. So you don't need to physically be a place anymore, certainly in the world, to go see your clients every once in a while. It's.
No, absolutely. And I think it's it's in the vicinity of to get to your target base, right? So whether it's candidate or client or both, just having that accessibility, I think, is important. But you haven't got to go to a brick and mortar place in order to achieve what you want to achieve, which is the interaction with others to get a result of some sort.
Yep, for sure. And we have another comment here going, great point on ownership structures as it influences culture and turnover. Absolutely. And that, I think, on the same topic, some of the things you mentioned right now, Julie, in terms of somebody who moved out of a major hub and is working fully remotely, this happened with a lot of good people, like good producers, whatever, who could afford to do that also at the time, which helped to move somewhere, maybe get more property, different quality of life. Everyone was rethinking this stuff during COVID in a big way and thinking that, there would have been a big change. And I think that there has been a big change. I think that ultimately, though, businesses would have to ask themselves the question, are we hiring the human being, like the person, or are we hiring the production that they can do? If it's just the numbers they can do on a page, then that's one thing. But as we get more AI tools to handle the bulk of production numbers, like efficiency numbers, everybody can kind of do more volume, I'm sure, and will be able to do more volume in the future. So maybe there needs to be a bit more of a push to the person who's the right person that could actually be a big deal. Like a good person in a smaller company is a game changer.
I agree. You know what? And I also think that I'll add this into the conversation. I think that as managers or leaders or office leaders, managers, or like team, whatever, I think that we should have, in some way, which I know for a bigger organization would be a potential logistical nightmare, in terms of sort of like one rule here, one rule there, and difference. That we should be able to make the decisions ourselves as to what is best for our team to increase the productivity, which is the ultimate goal of our team. But I think so many times it's, someone here makes the rule and the determination around, okay, you've got to come back in this many times per week, or it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, whatever it is. And it's, that's very autocratic in terms of the way that life doesn't sort of go like that really, and it's like I think that's the quickest way to have an exodus around the people who are actually doing the job. So,
Yeah.
some person here who is probably very clever and very successful, but also has one way of thinking. I don't know that that's the right person to make that type of decision, which opens a different can of worms entirely. But I just feel like it should be what works best for the team, for the unit, is the way that that team will create maximum efficiency or productivity, which actually is what everyone cares about most, rather than one size fits all, because it doesn't.
Yeah. And it's this again. I keep going back to this, and I never thought I would when I left this job years and years ago, 20 years ago. But being at a tech sales place, like value-added reseller, I feel like recruiters are value add as well, or a value-added service, right? In my head, and the idea there that they taught us that I wish kind of more people, like we kind of do this, I feel, but I feel like other recruiting firms could benefit from this. Was they hire different types of people with different approaches and interests, and encourage them to do that with under the idea that they would attract different clients, and
Yes.
you're trying to match
Yep.
getting different types of clients who work differently and think differently and express themselves differently. So they're going for a variety as opposed to a cookie cutter.
Yes.
You're limiting yourself to one kind of thing that works for you, but one kind of client, one kind of candidate. And especially in the people business, you'd figure we'd want to have more variety to be able to attract different people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And when I think that I'm sure that there's some statistics here somewhere too, but I think that people relate most often best to the people who are most like them in whatever fashion.
Yeah.
So whoever the person is that you hire or that's working in your team will relate to the audience that they relate to, and that's it better. Yes, they can, I'm sure, sort of sprinkle in some other folks or other groups or whatever on top of that. But the easiest connection is with folks that are like you. So having that diversity, and I don't mean that from, I mean diversity from a work from home, work from anywhere, work from in your group, will then attract a different type of group on the flip side in terms of like who they match with. So I think it's I think the point is it just widens rather than shrinks everything that we do,
Yeah.
which is to me opportunistic rather than sort of militant in terms of work style.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. What do you think about the fraud element? I know that there was some big cases that happened during COVID with work from home, where particularly in tech recruiting, because the volume was so high and the speed was so fast, that certain people frauded the system. We're not where they said they were. We're not who they said they were, and we're not legally allowed to work in Canada or the US or what have you. That they used it as an opportunity to sort of squeak in and do things that were, again, like the whole tax thing, the whole working across borders, whatever, like all of that. Not just full on identity fraud, but like working. We were talking to people who were interested in having a Canadian employee in the US and working from Canada on the US market. Now that's been shut down. I've been told by everybody, legal says you can't do that. Actually, they need to have a work permit, even if they live here. Sorry, if they live here, if they're working on the US market, unless they're working the Canadian market or whatever. So, like that element of it, do you think that plays a big part in that people get maybe slapped more on the wrist than we know, and are scared to get in trouble doing more remote work? Is there a fear there, maybe?
Maybe. Maybe from some situations, but I think if you do your due diligence around that, then it's probably less likely to happen. That also may be something that's happened because of the supply and demand situation.
Yeah.
That a couple of years ago, in terms of like the employers, particularly with recruiting experts, were just so desperate, and I use the desperate word in the nicest possible way, for hands and brains to do the recruitment job. Then maybe they took chances or were not as diligent as they normally would have been, had that not been the situation with the surge in the market for recruitment people, as example. Yeah, I don't know. I think that, I mean, as now we've got the Ontario license thing,
Yeah,
the Ontario licensing happening, where what we're doing is we are licensed for a certain group of people. So we're checking employment status and the right to work for these folks. So if you are an agency that does that and has procedures in place so that you can work with the people that you can work with, then there shouldn't be an issue. But that's obviously the Ontario licensing thing was brought in as a not necessarily for this reason, but I think, and it's also after the fact. But that certainly will help here. Not that I think that you need to go to that extreme to check someone's work status, but as an employer, you certainly should check someone's work status. And if you check their work status, then unless it's a total, fraud job and a sort of counterfeit item, then
yeah,
I think that you should be fine.
yeah. And I think that personally, I feel like the ease of doing things with video now helps a lot to eliminate fraud. Insisting on 1, 2 video steps, or like seeing a person, seeing if there's any change, their unwillingness to go on video versus just a phone call, or certainly not just by email for Lord's sake, or whatever. You know what I mean? Like it's yeah. I think that it's so easy to do so much video now that helps, certainly.
Absolutely, and you know what? I think certainly for me, and I don't know, obviously, about everyone else in the recruitment industry, but I like you make a connection when you are either face to face or on video with someone. So a phone call to me, yes, tells me how you're going to conduct yourself on the phone, which is great, which is how a lot of sales business is completed. So that's important. But if I just speak to someone, I don't feel comfortable doing much with someone who I've only spoken to on the phone. I need to see eyeballs. I want eyeballs to sort of get a sense of someone, which
Yeah,
is in our business the most important thing, really. It's like, who is this person? Not just where do they sit, where are they physically, and do they have the right to the person, but who is this person? Because I need to feel comfortable that I want to work with someone and represent them into one of my clients. And I think that you get that by doing it face to face,
for
so
sure.
much more than on the phone.
And especially, I don't know about you, Julie, but I had some people that I worked with in the past, or that I've spoken to, but certainly that I worked with, where their MO when they were meeting face to face or video was to always be a little bit late. Not a lot, but never be perfectly on time. 2, 3 minutes, and then come in and apologize for being a couple minutes late. And the idea there is to assess character. You're pushing a button. Is the person frazzled? Are they there? Were they there on time? Are they frazzled? Are they like, oh yeah, no worries? Or how did they react to just the smallest thing, right? You can learn a lot about somebody if they're just kind of like, yeah, it's fine. And they're like super angry. You can tell they're seething inside, like that you've wasted 2 minutes of their time. Then you know that that's how you're going to have to work with them. You can push on that and go like, oh boy, this person's a real stickler for stuff. Obviously you don't want to waste anyone's time, but it gives you so much information looking at someone's eyeballs and then apologizing for something. Hey, sorry, I'm 2 minutes late right away. It gives someone anyone who's watching it's kind of like, is that why you're late to all of my meetings, Rick? No,
Well, I'm sitting there thinking like, oh
manipulating.
Lord, it's like I'm going to be judged like if I'm late to a meeting. No, but I think that particular example you need to be careful of, because I think that's also cultural, right? So as a British person, I can say this. So being late is not something that you do as a British person. It's high up on the list of it's a no-no. So, however, I would say that, and sorry, Canadians, for mentioning this, but as a Canadian, it's a lot more easy and sort of laissez-faire about whether you might be a little bit, a couple of minutes is not like a showstopper. Whereas in England, it would totally be marked or mentally marked. This person was late to a meeting. And I'm probably going to get a barrage of messages now from every British person that I know say that's not true. But that's how I was brought up in England, and it's just the way that it's just a cultural thing. You're not late.
See that this is a productive conversation, because then if I know that I'm going to send you as a candidate to a client of mine who's always late for everything, who's really loosey goosey, and it's testing, right? It's a beta test for what it's going to be like when the client comes in, and if the client is super stickler and reacts the same way to me, me, well, now I know I have a bit of a personality match. It's just, but the point is to try to do little things that get people outside of, I'm showcasing myself for an interview right now. So you can see a bit what they're like, right? And then know like, oh yeah, we shouldn't send them to this person or whatever, because there's obviously a deal breaker. I agree with you too, that you've often said we shouldn't make that decision on people's behalf, and we shouldn't. But sometimes you just know, right? Like sometimes you're like, no, it's
not a good fit.
Yeah.
Yes, it's not a good fit. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, so I guess final summation, we have no idea what's happening, but we have a lot of opinions about it, which is great.
I don't think we ever knew what was happening, did we? But no. we always had an opinion about it. Yeah.
For sure.
No, I think the thing is, it changes, right? As it changes, can we predict what's going to happen? Let's hope we don't predict that people move back to 5 days in office. And let's hope that we predict that this will stay the status quo, and that will be actually a benefit from COVID and what we were faced with a couple of years ago. And I also think, funnily enough, actually, I did, and this was not contrived, but I did put a post up on LinkedIn today around a situation that did happen around a client who was looking for somebody that was that their original mandate was they need to have someone local because they want them to come into the office, and they want to come to the office to develop the team spirit, the harmony. They're going to be managing others. How can they manage someone else working from home? Blah, 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 all those types of things that you hear. And not that we didn't listen to that. We totally listened to it. We listened to it. But here's the but. But we found someone who was exceptional, really exceptional. And the bottom line is that they will add a lot of money to that client's business. They'll increase their portfolio. They would be a fantastic fit for the organization, and just a absolute match, apart from the fact that they just can't go into the office ever, because they don't live anywhere near the office. They're in the same time zone, but don't live anywhere near, and have no desire to go into the office, but do also have a proven track record of being successful in a very similar role, which, you know, hopefully is perhaps sort of tipped our client over the edge in terms of sort of talking to her. So good news is that client then said, okay, let's come up with a new position, which means that that person doesn't have to come into the office because we see the value that they'll bring. Yeah. So good for them, and great for the candidate. So you know, my point here is that it's just it can work even if clients see the value in someone and don't have someone at the top saying like, this is the mandated, you know, so, and the hiring manager has the ability to influence the rule, let's call it, or chooses to do that because they're senior enough or have enough influence in the organization, it can work out brilliantly. Yep, brilliantly. Absolutely. So just being open-minded around flexibility and adapting to what you can find in the market for the better of the business, I think is how I would sum that up.
For sure. And, you know, I think that the potential, like these conversations, I think are the key takeaway from the whole COVID situation, is that there is more of a willingness to think outside the box and have discussions about this kind of stuff. It's not just taken for granted any longer. And I think that that is a really positive takeaway from all this stuff. I think that's what could lead to multiple different kinds of models coexisting, is just actually discussing what is the stuff around it. Is there really a benefit to doing things back in the office, or are we just hearkening back to it for the sake of wanting to go back to some sort of normal? There's this writer, Mohsin Hamid, that I really like, who writes speculative fiction about like the way culture works and whatever. And he has this great quote randomly from an interview where he says, you know, it's the collective failure to imagine a better future that causes people to hearken back to the past. So if we collectively fail to say, hey, here's how it could be better, then people are going to be like, you know what, let's go back to how it used to be. It was definitely better then. Mm-hmm. And I think these conversations can do that, can get people psyched and excited to do fresh, new, progressive things, like having a vibrant culture of people who are great producers and potentially totally virtual, like Raymond George Consultancy, for example.
Nice plug, Rick. Nice plug.
Self-promotion.
Self-promotion. Well done, you. Yes, shameless. Yes.
Well, thank you, Julie, for joining us. Anything else you'd like to add to our lovely people before we call it a stream?
No, I think I'm good. I think in 2 weeks' time, Jenny will be back, and we'll do this together with yourself. So yeah, so I think that's something, and we'll be then what we'll be sort of like mid, so we'll be almost into September, back to school, and yeah, where everything will go crazy, or even crazier than it currently is. So I think generally on the market topic, which we weren't on, but I'm going to add it in there. Things are busy. So the market is busy. So anyone that's not busy, I think that you might want to look over your shoulder, because it is busy out there. So there are opportunities. There are people moving, no matter which market you're in. There's a lot of stuff happening. You just need to eyes wide open.
Exactly. And thank you to everybody who joined. Thank you for all the participation. Much appreciated. If you are seeing this after the fact, again, please feel free to message us to talk about it further. We'd both be happy to do so. And see you all next Wednesday.
Thank you, sir.